Welcome back to the Reframe Your Artistry interviews. We speak with individuals who are thinking big picture while doing beautiful things right here, right now. And wow, today I'm fortunate to be bringing to y'all someone that I'm excited to re-engage with, Dr. Tanner Wallace. From this point forward, with that elegant name, I will just probably refer, as she kindly said I could, to her as Tanner. So Tanner is someone who, in my life, I think perhaps for meaningful reasons, I have bumped into over the years, and somewhat maybe by accident, maybe for other reasons. And that started through our public grade school experience. We're at the same high school, and I was a younger student there, and I would look up to the poise and energy and really purposefulness of Tanner. And when I was a few years younger, and I was that shadow on the wall, probably creeping her out, but and then we ran into each other at the same grad school, and I was fortunate enough to hitch a ride home one holiday, Boston to Philly. And I'm not sure if you remember, but I do vividly remember that Alicia Keys was playing. I think
that album was on. When you said that, I was like, that is such my soundtrack of that era.
Right? And
I
it
love
was
that album.
the songs in A minor, songs in
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It was like on nonstop, and I fell in love with it in the backseat of your car that day. And then recently, my sister-in-law, Megan, lovely Megan, felt that for similar professional interests and personal overlaps, that I may be interested in Tanner's platform, and that's kind of where I got interested in possibly sharing your ideas more broadly. Tanner, you have a very informative and accessible, important platform on trauma and healing and relational healing through Instagram at This Is Candy Kiss, correct?
That's correct.
And a well-regarded podcast also on relational and marital optimal healing and relating, I guess, called Marriage is Hard.
It is indeed.
I like that from a mindful perspective, that it can be a great many things, but it's important. I think we don't speak often enough, honestly, about the challenges. So thank you. And I look forward to digging into that podcast, and I encourage my listeners here to do as well. And Tanner is also, and you can correct me if I'm not getting this accurately, a researcher and professor through the University of Pittsburgh, focusing predominantly in developmental psychology.
Yep.
With a specific, specific interest in developmental psychology, which is how we progress throughout the lifespan and in different modes of development, particularly relatedness and also trauma recovery and that intersection there.
Yep.
Yeah. And what I think I was most curious to start the conversation with today, as it relates to the Reframe Your Artistry community, which is a community that I had established through a couple of different platforms to share artistry, to find healing mechanisms, to heal from personal and professional artistic traumas. Whether it be feeling a fractured identity after major changes in someone's artistic progress, whether there be some physical changes for fine artists, for dancers. Now during the pandemic, there's a whole nother level of trauma for the artistic world. So fractured sense of identity, and then also this like rigid sense of who someone is supposed to be as the artist, whether it be kind of because of someone's classical rigid training or the market driven artistic world. So I'm really big into and trying to promote this idea of mindful artistry, which is just noticing and being with what is and capturing your world the way it is. And that's good enough. It's beautiful, just the way it is. So, so that many of the artists I intersect with come into challenges that in many ways I find are trauma-based, though we might not label it that. It's like art anxiety, disenfranchisement, and also sometimes a disconnect or fear of audience or opinion, and a difficulty with a relationship with themselves as well as a healthy relationship with self over the years. So I think that there's lots of interlaps here.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got curious about trauma and relationships, and kind of just how that delicacy of relationships and hope in relationships and hope for self has affected you personally, and where you find some hope for others. So I guess we can start the conversations there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that sort of context for this community around this podcast and what you're hoping to do. I think personally, this idea of, anytime you're in a situation as a human where whatever you feel is being asked of you, the resources you have at your disposal to accomplish whatever it is you think you're supposed to do are not enough to accomplish the goal. So your resources are being outpaced by the stress you perceive in the environment is a very powerful negative experience. And so a lot of what you talked about, I automatically went to this kind of everyday working definition that I've adopted of trauma, which is this experience of your resources not being able to keep pace with the stressors in your environment for some sustained period of time, paired with, and this is where the relational piece comes in that you noted, that's really a core to my passion. I think when that happens, how people survive that in healthy ways is they have a safe enough other to guide them and provide them kind of complementary resources, or let them borrow their resources so that they can be shored up to take on the stressor, or they help them reframe the stressor or take away some of the stressor. But if you are in that situation and you don't have the safe other, what you experience then is stress that's too great for you to handle, but then the additional relational hit that you take when you feel you're alone to face something that is too fearful, too scary for you to face on your own, and you feel alone in trying to handle it. And that, to me, is the heart of the trauma. A lot of people can handle a lot of things when they feel that they have somebody there by their side and they're not left abandoned and alone to face something that is too scary to face on their own. And I think that can happen in all sorts of contexts. The piece that I focus on is largely around childhood betrayal trauma, but that's a very specific thing. But I think a lot of the things that you mentioned have roots to that. And I think for me personally, you asked me how I got into this, and it's like, not that I wanted to. I mean, I'd much rather be like, I don't know anything about childhood betrayal trauma. But unfortunately, I know quite a bit about it. And I think for me, and I would encourage your audience listening too, and there might just be a subset of people listening, or it may be everybody listening, if you chronically feel that life is sort of falling apart for you, And that's all you ever have ever known. Relationships are always chaotic. You kind of always feel that you have this, no matter how often you practice mindfulness, now how often you try to light candles and be present, there's always this hum of like stress in your body. If you're listening, you hear that, you're like, that's me. You have probably unresolved trauma issues, and they're likely from like a betrayal nature, because human betrayal is one of the most toxic experiences we can have as humans, because we are meant to be in close relationships with each other, like the attachment context, where we give and receive love, we can feel vulnerable, we feel supported, we feel safe. That is the core of the human experience. And so to have that violated in some ways as an adult, or particularly as a child, the consequences of that are devastating. And I think for a lot of people, you kind of just keep going because that's all you know. But for some people, you hit your back against a wall and what you're doing just doesn't work anymore. And I think for me, that was when my second marriage was about to fail, and there was there was nowhere to go but to explore something new and to be like, I don't understand this. Why is this happening? And
Yeah.
that's what led me to start being more honest about my childhood and what I had experienced. And it really started for me with talking to my sibling, my sister, and us trying to piece together things. But
Yeah.
so that's
See,
a long
the
answer. I don't
Handmaid's
know where you
Touch.
want to take that.
So powerful. And thank you for entrusting this community and entrusting the conversation with me in what you candidly shared there.
Yeah.
And I think,
I would just add a side note, because I think this
yeah,
relates to what you were saying earlier, is, even when I hear introductions from people that say things like, oh, I always admired her poise. Like when I hear that, my lived experience of that is almost astounding, because I always think, and for a
wow,
while I carried around shame. So if you'd said that to me a year ago, my inside experience would have been one of such shame, because I
huh,
would have been like, she doesn't know the truth. If she only knew the truth, I wouldn't be on this podcast, and she wouldn't wanted to reconnect with me.
right, right,
My own healing has allowed me to understand, well, of course that's what
right,
she saw, because that's
right,
what I presented. Um, but my lived experiences, those were some of the worst years of my life. I mean, so much was falling apart for me all the time. And I think anyone who's producing things for other people to consume, whether it's a grade or a degree or
mhm,
content or a painting or a production or choreography, there's some aspect of you're trying to produce for yourself but for others. And I think, in that act of production, there's some approval that we're all seeking, right? Like we're all like, if I just have this perfect product and I get validated from the outside, I'll be okay. And so for a
right,
lot of people, they look okay from the outside, they're producing, but the hole they're trying to fill cannot be filled with a glowing review. It can't
right,
be filled with a full house of people at your production,
right,
or
right,
someone buying your artwork. It's filled something different, and you can always chase that. And so when I hear, like, I chased things for so long and it led me to such dark places, that it's just very interesting how our internal and external experiences can be
yeah,
so
yeah,
vastly different. And I think where I am now is really trying to help everyone um, honestly talk about the inner and the outer worlds, and open up spaces like this to understand that's not always the case for everyone. And how do we create safe spaces for people to be honest about what's going on internally, so
right,
that there is more alignment and we can release some of the shame that we have that really weighs us down. And I think it negatively impacts the greatest gifts we have to contribute to communities, because part of us is always hiding a piece of us.
right,
I think when we can let that go, the liberation that comes from that allows you to create and contribute at levels that you didn't even know were possible when
right,
you were kind of locked in this
yeah.
cycle of trying to perform for others.
Well, well, thank you again for taking us to an even deeper layer of you really fully showing up here, and my heart is glowing um, in the world that I wish to more often exist. And I
Yeah.
say I often feel still isolated in my spouse, even, or friends, and in the local community where I still live. People might feel that I live mostly in an imaginary world. Well, I am comfortable there. But what the world I wish you could also coexist in with me, it sounds like we might be compatriots in the person that I think I knew in snippets and admired, I
Yeah.
think is still very much a part of you. And I can imagine and worry, does this recapitulate trauma in some
Yeah.
ways, as you mentioned? But there are beautiful pieces, I think, from healing psychology, whether it be dialectics, that, we can have these two extremes and that there be an infinite in between of who you are, Tanner, of who I am, and that
Yeah.
all of it creates a whole, a very vibrant, generative whole. Um,
Yeah.
I think sometimes, and I think of, my artistic clients who still may be a painter, a lovely painter that I work with, who is still very um, technically, classically capable, and yet who wants to reveal other sides that might have clashed with what was okay to be seen or what was like couth
Mhm.
in her growing up world.
Yeah.
Um, I think maybe the starting point again is to say that I see you and I hope that you see yourself as whole. And just like that innocent child before the betrayals, before the
Yeah.
attachment wounds, much of us is still right there. And something I value from kind of the mindfulness art world. Again, I like to say the mindfulness art world is the antithesis of the market driven world. Or it's like if you were
Mhm.
looking at two gardens and one was
Yeah.
like the perfectly manicured Italian garden of
Yeah.
Longwood Gardens, like a majestic
Yeah.
local garden here in Pennsylvania, versus just like a raw, evolving and devolving forest.
Yeah.
To me, there isn't necessarily a value laden difference
Mhm.
between the two.
Mhm.
They are both of wholeness and complete aesthetic beauty and wonder. I hope that we can start to grow art that can then parallel, maybe create a different form of art therapy, we being this particular Reframe Your Artistry platform, but
Yeah.
also in thinking about humanity, how can we continue to evolve so that we can hold that childhood innocence, the up and down, the whole of self, the wounded side,
Yeah.
with the side looking for the grandness. I think of
Yeah.
Kohut's
Yeah.
psychology, self psychology. Have you read
No.
about
Mm-mm.
Kohut's theory? He has like a
Mm-mm.
three-part theory of how we avoid being narcissists in life, like not having a hollow inside. And it's that
Yeah.
we need to be celebrated in some ways or feel celebrated. We need somebody that can kind of mirror, like, I see what you're really saying
Yeah.
authentically. And
Uh-huh.
then the third part is someone to challenge us so that we're always
Mm.
growing. And that helps us to build a less hollow inside.
Mm.
I feel like the work that you're doing is going to really facilitate that for the world, Tanner. I think it's rich and beautiful. I
Mm.
wonder if you could kind of pitch to me how someone might heal and just
Mm.
start a seed of healing and hope in that moment of aloneness.
Yeah.
Because I can think of for artists sometimes in the context that, well, an artist may get so angry at their manuscript or the effort that they've been putting in. So that very thing that was their sublimation, their saving grace,
Yeah.
becomes their enemy too. So they're just like completely if art could be their person, if it's not
Yeah.
necessarily concrete humans, which I think sometimes art does feel that attachment
Yeah.
and object, in that
Yeah.
moment of aloneness, without person, without creative outlet,
Mm-hmm.
what what may be one of those kind of whispers of you're going to be okay, you're not fully alone, when
Yeah.
all else, art, self, others, is really cut off?
Yeah. So I was going to take it in a slightly different direction before
Yeah.
you said that you're not alone. So what I would say, and this is like where like the psychology and the art can like have such an interesting juxtaposition.
Uh-huh.
I would think someone who's sort of sitting in those moments of overwhelm or just trying to get some um, in touch with what's sort of going on with themselves to for deeper understanding of connection to self and their art or people around them. I actually think one of the first steps of healing is to recognize voices in your mind that are not your own.
Mhm.
And that, like, and I think one of the things that's frustrated me about mindfulness, so, you know, in 2013, I had I hit my own rock bottom. And, my first step was to start mindfulness practice. And I'm not going to, like, it allowed me to be a safe enough parent and really like stop doing the kind of damage that I couldn't repair or would be very difficult to repair in my personal life. So I'm so thankful for mindfulness. But my personal opinion is mindfulness can help you gain the kind of awareness you need to begin healing. But I do not think mindfulness can heal you personally. I think it's the start to the kind of full body awareness you need to even understand intuitively what you need to heal. But I would say, because you asked like about a healing step,
Mhm.
it's really start to tune in to the voices that you hear that are guiding and sort of shaping how you view the world.
Mhm.
And if you do that, I think for some of us, myself included, you start to hear voices that come from the adults in your life or other, like, I mean, institutional trauma is real. So, like, I know you talked about people that have had experiences in very rigid training programs. So,
Mhm.
people that coached you, people that were mentoring you, those they're likely those voices that have sort of become integrated into how you view yourself and the way you monitor and evaluate yourself. And
Mhm.
I would say from myself and listening to the healing journeys of many other people, when you start to identify which of those voices you are not your own, but have become integrated into how you view your world, and you start to kick those voices out or very
Talk
firmly
back
tell
to
them
them.
to get
Yeah.
out. Yeah, like, like I don't know if your podcast is cursing on it, but I just actually did an episode where I role played how you put an inner critic in its place. And I surprised myself. Like, I didn't realize I would go so raw, but like it just totally came out. And I was like, okay, well, wow. Like if that's how you do it. So it's not like a pleasant, like, oh, can you please stop talking? But it's literally what you would say to that mentor that shamed you and belittled you for not moving your foot in the like exact right moment, right?
Right.
The parent that only showed up when you had a full house, but failed to come when your play was a flop, right? Like
Right.
only showed up when things were good and not when things were bad. Like all of those voices that have come to haunt our sense of self and are clouding that true self inside of us, the innocent, the intuitive self, the self that has all the wisdom. The first whisper is like, you are not alone because you've got all these voices like in your mind that you really need to kick out. Like I call them squatters. Like they are not part of you. You've
Squatters.
adopted
I
them.
love that. That's great.
kick
I'm gonna steal that one.
kick the squatters out.
Hmm.
And I have seen, honestly, like people struggle until they mustered up the courage and the anger to really directly um, tell those voices and those inherited perspectives to truly get out. They are no longer welcome here.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that is you create the space to hear the whispers of what I like to think of is, and it's kind of a, take it or leave it. You can apply a non-gendered voice to it, but kind of the good mothering and like the mother nature, the universe, all the nurturing qualities of the world, however you want to think about it,
Yeah.
to invite sort of the deepest voice of like the good mother that knows exactly what you need, knows exactly how to manage your fear, knows exactly how to hold your hand, knows exactly what you're good at, knows exactly how to guide you gently to find your highest calling.
Right.
um, that's the voice that needs more space to be present in your body and your mind, and it's very hard to find that voice when it's being crowded out by a bunch of stuff you don't need. and
Yeah.
and and I think it's really different. It's hard. I always like when I'm doing something like this, it's so hard to articulate, but a lot of times you see in like popular psychology the like negative self-talk, and that's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about
Right.
something
It's
like
much
much more
deeper.
profound and deeper. Yeah.
It's that intuitive voice, or it's that voice I'm thinking of, like the opening pages of Eat, Pray, Love, that voice that uh, Elizabeth Gilbert had
Yeah.
heard on a deep soulful level.
Yeah.
This is a really important image that you're cultivating here, Tanner. Thank you. I am sorry. It sounds like you had an under-fulfilling experience with mindfulness. I think I was exposed enough in my training
Yeah.
to get like a really broad reaching angle on so many applications and its integration, like chopping up spinach in a more beautiful like lasagna, to see how it can wed well with other tools, right, for
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting, because in the book Reframe Your Artistry, one of my early chapters is exactly on
Yeah.
that. The coach, getting rid of the early teachers and what was said to you, and just sitting with
Yeah.
it long enough to get clarity. So ultimately this is clarity, but then also
Yeah.
the space to start to listen to that most profound intuitive voice, like you said, that pure, truer
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
And I
And
think,
I think, to be clear, I had no other tools. Like, so I mean, maybe if it had been like paired with something else, but I think the way I was presented it, it was like, this will be the thing.
right,
Right. And
right,
for
right,
me, that was not the thing, because there like I had so much other stuff I had really had to
right.
work through. So I think that's the danger. It becomes
Yeah,
given to people as like the answer. Like, if only you could be present, if only you could stay with this. And then I
right.
think for a childhood trauma survivor, there's like an additional level of shame when like that doesn't work for you. You're like, I must be really messed up if like mindfulness doesn't even work.
Right, right. And I think it's how it's presented. Like, are you being an
Yes.
authentic person too? Are you hiding behind the theories of it? I recall in some of my earliest moments in internships,
Yeah.
the terror I had to run out of the room when I was asked to kind of experience and learn a mechanism for mindfulness, that more formal meditation. I was terrified and
Yeah.
underprepared for the voices that just
Yeah.
flooded me. And then that
Yeah.
layer of shame when you first do that. So I think it's
Yeah.
terribly high risk for people in early trauma recovery and acute trauma recovery if
Yes.
it's
Yes.
poorly or
Yes.
simplistically presented as just raw spinach rather than integrated
Yes.
integrated
Yes.
mindfully. But the voice
Yes.
thing that is so um, profound and important. And I think one other layer I like to add to that, Tanner, and I wonder if you bring in tools of sense-based grounding. That's a question I have for you, because I think it's kind of
Mm.
becoming a controversial mixed bag of opinions to bring in sense-based things. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
In some of my writing, and I feel like if I wrote the book that I wrote now, I might not write so much on sense-based healing. What I mean
Mm.
is that once I might get a client to that quiet place of starting to hear one's voice.
Yeah.
And I kind of pitched this idea of just begin again. The original title to my work, the working title of my book was just Hold the Charcoal, like hold the charcoal. I wanted people to just be tactile, touch a simple grounding item like charcoal that could be stroked in kind of messy, simple ways.
Yeah.
As a way to kind of begin again. I've heard mixed opinions now on kind of maybe even our senses lie to us. They're not even trustworthy. But I wonder if then once you start to identify that voice, if there's a couple of really anchoring next steps you might be able to provide as ideas. And then I have one more curious question I can't help but asking while you're here. I don't want to abuse your time.
So, I mean, you would know way better than I do about the clinical pieces and what the research is. I can just speak from like the healing communities that I'm part of and sort of swapping stories and my own experience. But I would say if it's similar to the idea of like reparative positive experiences, that is so huge. And I've heard so many people talk about the role that that has played. So basically a reparative positive experience is just some small thing that you do that immediately prompts a positive experience. So it could be like a soft blanket, hot tea, a candle light, you know, soft music. And, you know, when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's so, you know, wishy-washy. Like, you know, I'm like a scientist. I'm like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. But it's so huge, right? It just reminds you, it makes you feel safe. It's just like a cue, like you're safe here, everything's okay. And so I don't know how that dialogues with what you're talking about specifically, but I think as a grounding practice, that's been really successful for me, and I know others as well. But I'm not sure how is that similar or different than what you were just talking about?
Well, I think it helps me. It's so fun to have this conversation because I'm more in the doing end of it, and you're getting that very helpful, fruitful kind of big picture perspective on what the kind of the research and the statistics are revealing is more provably effective, evidence-based effective. So it's good. It helps me to feel like I'm not still beating down an unproductive path. Now, given while you're here, I'm curious too, as far as what you're finding is maybe a couple key prompts as most effective tools for taking care of collaborative working relationships. Because I think, of course, marriage, since you're doing all this in-depth, important work on marriage, it's often an important template that has parallels to so many other working relationships. And for the artist, I often think of the relationship to the self as the worker, and then the self day in, day out, that interplay. I think of the relationship between the artist and the audience and the critics, like, how dare you? And then I think most artists in this day and age, we can't deny that there's some necessity to have collaborative relationships. So what do you find in the relationship to take care of oneself and have steadiness and self-care in relationships?
I would say I think the biggest thing that anyone can do for themselves to improve their relationships is really to understand. I mean, because we all have negative emotions, right? Like that is part of the human experience. I think a lot of people somehow think that if, you know, you work hard enough, it's all positive. But actually, you know, everyone has negative experience. There is no such thing as like totally positive experiences, or else you're somehow you've cut off part of your human experience of the world. But I think one of the key things for every human to try to understand is, and this is so hard because you don't know what you don't know because you only know your experience. And so it's very hard to get an outside perspective on your personal experience. But I really am so passionate about every single human trying to understand, is the negative emotional response that I'm having to this trigger a sort of typical or normal human response, which can be intense and awful, or is it a trauma-based response?
Mm-hmm.
And one of my passion projects is, especially in the marriage support space, is to really help everyone understand that the vast majority of advice that are given to couples or given to humans about positive relationships are not of talking about trauma-based responses. And so just like mindfulness is not going to be the cure-all for everybody if you are suffering like acute trauma or in early stages of trauma recovery.
Right.
A lot of the communication advice is not going to work for you because you're not dealing with, a sort of typically experienced negative trigger. And so the one thing that I would just try to always educate audiences is the idea of an emotional flashback. And so this comes from Pete Walker's work on complex trauma, and he draws from a lot of people, but I love his description of it best. But an emotional flashback is something that's very specific to people that experience developmental trauma, which means that for multiple years in a household, you experienced some sort of abuse and neglect. And that results in an adult when you have an experience that takes you back, like somehow in your physical body, your emotional memory, you're taken back to an earlier experience. You literally have a full body flashback, but it has no visual component. So until you start to kind of like have some psychoeducation about like what like on paper, what does this look like? And you start to become aware. And when you are having an emotional flashback, I would say it's nearly impossible to have a wise mind. I mean, it's you are so out of body, you're almost dissociated from yourself. But you're saying things, you're doing things. So people think it's just you. You're just responding as you, and you think you're just responding as you, but you are responding as your 4-year-old self, your 11-year-old self, your 13-year-old self, and so your skills are of that age, even though you can't maybe recognize it. So imagine trying to have a productive feedback session with a collaborator and you're in an emotional flashback and you're as if you're 11 years old. That's not going to go, it's not going to go well, right? Because you have so many more skills the older you get and the wiser you get and the more, refined you get in how to handle conflict. And I think what's really devastating about that is without awareness, that interaction is going to go poorly, it's going to fall apart, and then the trauma survivor now has another data point about how they're defective instead of viewing it as I have a deficiency, I need to help myself understand. And so really that distinction between a trauma-based response and what needs to happen in that scenario and just I'm triggered, I'm having a negative reaction to something is key to improving relationships.
Yeah, I hear even as if it's empowering to be able to organize, and it's stabilizing just to be able to organize and code what is occurring.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for a lot, I speak for myself, but and talking to some other survivors too, like, if you're emotionally flashed back, like I step away from interactions now. Like I recognize there's no way I'm going to be able to bring my wisest mind, and I'm not going to be able to reason myself out of it. I'm not going to be able to meditate myself out of it. Like I need to literally just let it totally, the adrenaline rush, the hypervigilance, the like nervous system that got kicked in. I literally need to let that drain, like my body process that fully. And I have some ways to make it kind of go faster now that I'm more advanced, and then I can come back to something. But there's no good that's going to come. And so I think stopping a lot of interactions. I mean, like if you're listening, you're like, I don't know if I'm having a trauma-based response or a normal response. My blanket advice to everyone is just stop the interaction. Like it's better to stop an interaction.
The power of the pause. I'm big and
or the like come back next week, or like I need to go right now. Like, but it's hard to recognize that when you're you're in it.
Right. To the Reframe Your Artistry community, particularly also parents of teenagers. And just so many developmental stages, that earlier stage of individuation too. It's often
Yeah.
misunderstood, how very important it is to give people the space to stop and pause and
Yeah.
re-anchor. And that's it's and it's unique to each person, but I like what you said, that there has to be, for many of us, an acknowledgement of the adrenal, the kind of whole body physiological and kind of mind body experience
Yeah.
of the stress and the reactivation of
Yeah.
traumas. Yeah.
Because what I would just add to that, um, you know, when you are, when you've survived childhood trauma,
Hmm.
you're literally going back to a place where you didn't feel safe. Like like the place that you're supposed. So it's not just like oh, I don't like this feedback. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to survive this.
Hmm.
And your body has gone back to survival mode at the most primal level.
Yeah.
And that brings out a lot of really powerful fight or flight
It's a
responses that you.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
recipe for aging, kind of real mind body health concerns
Yeah.
too. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So I would say, but then the flip side, to make sure we end on like a more positive note, I mean, I truly think the only kind of like authentic healing comes through relationships. Like that is the place, because like that recreating of an attachment context and earning a secure attachment to another, I would say human, although maybe the art, like you're teaching me some new stuff and I'm opening my mind to perhaps it's, a production or some sort of creation that you create. I think as a developmental psychologist of human relations, but
Sure, of course, the
whatever that
mirror
is.
neurons can't be
Yeah.
denied. And however,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. But
sand
that
tray
that
wabi
sense of,
sabi art is also nourishing.
yeah. So that secure attachment, that kind of relational healing that makes the recovery of childhood trauma or adult trauma possible is, makes me believe in some sort of like higher power. I mean, it's so profound what we can help each other through as, in relation with others. It is truly just such a miracle that I almost can't even comprehend how that's possible.
Yeah,
So that's the beautiful side of relationships and healing and attachment.
I agree. And Tanner, I just feel uplifted and challenged in speaking with you today. Um, I think it's telling for me often when when I notice that I'm getting more comfortable conversing with someone, talking about my own thoughts with someone. It's a testament to the person with whom I'm speaking.
Mhm.
And thank you so much for this conversation today. I know that the healing artist community, the community of artists that are looking to be, through their art and also their personhood, more authentic
And
and more
whole.
at peace and whole with their
Yeah.
artistry and who they are as a person, just as they are, where they're at,
Yeah.
will really benefit from this. And I hope this is just the beginning of our conversation. So many percolating questions, but I want to honor your time. And
Thank you.
I,
Thank you for having me. I learned more than I'm usually in just like the very solid like marriage everyone's talking about. So I'm appreciate thinking expansively about how all of these things apply to
yeah,
people doing all sorts of things in their life and trying to connect some dots and gain clarity to really bring about their most authentic whole self. And it really is the gift of a lifetime to continue to work, to heal,
mm,
to, reintegrate parts of you that, were either told weren't okay or you should leave behind, to reclaim those as your own and really step into your power as a human, is absolutely beautiful and transcendent. So I encourage everyone to, keep going, keep in communities like this. I mean, this is such an important, I really think this work is best done in communities because it's very lonely. And to gather people together, all paying attention and interested in the same things and sharing stories and learning together is such a gift. So thank you for creating this community, inviting me into it, and it's been an honor from my end as well.
My honor. Well, I think that we'll just close on your eloquent words and just I encourage my listeners and viewers and my creators to take with you the gifts that Dr. Tanner Wallace has shared with us today. And be you, as we're reminded, access all the parts and tend to and offer loving kindness to all of them.
Yes,
Um,
yes, even the ones that cause the most trouble.
yeah, which is our challenge in life. But we will stay hopeful, especially after your shared pitches today. All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.